How's everyone doing? Afternoon, after lunch? Everybody well fed? Yes? Come on, well fed? No? All right, good. Well, I am super excited to be up here. We have an amazing panel here in many different ways. You're going to hear from them in their own words. I think one of the things I love about this panel is, in addition to the representation we have from their current organizations, their current commercial companies, we also on this stage have representation from the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, and British Civil Services, which we were talking about this a little bit prior to coming out here. I don't think that's all too unique in the industry that we're in, but I think amazing perspective from incredible people, incredible organizations, and we're going to get to that. So without further ado, why don't I ask you to start, Robert? Maybe just introduce yourself, a little bit about the organization, and you personally, how you got into threat intel.
Okay, sure. My name is Rob Antonellis. I work for Avangrid. We are a Northeast-based energy company, but we have assets in about 25 states. We have electric and gas in New England, and then we have wind and solar in the other 20-odd states. The big offshore wind project off Massachusetts is ours, so we're real proud of that. I've been with Avangrid for about 4 years. Before that, I did 20 years with FBI and CIA doing threat intelligence, worked a little bit with Director Coker, who's here this morning. So that's really how I got into this. There was an opportunity to leave government, work for some amazing people at Avangrid, work with a great team, and the work that I do is very similar. So I took that opportunity, and sort of here I am. And really, some of the the threats that we're looking at are the same. We're very high profile, so we're energy sector. That's an issue for us. We've got plenty of people targeting us, and then because we're critical infrastructure, we've got Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Sort of everybody's looking at us. So it's every day is new, and every day is busy.
Yeah, hi, Josh Hedges. I'm with JP Morgan Chase. I lead the cyber threat intelligence team for North America for JP Morgan. I've been with the firm for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was with the NSA for 14, which is really still, I'm trying to get over trying to say that in public. But yeah, I think, I started out at NSA working in counterterrorism. Thought I'd do that my whole entire career. Turns out that it's not a great work-life balance idea. So I decided to go for something that was more low-key, like cyber. That was also a mistake. So yeah, here I am.
Matthew, go ahead.
Matthew Lesturgeon. I work at Ferguson Enterprises. For those that don't know us, we're a wholesale piping, plumbing distributor. Many of you have probably worked with us without knowing. We have a presence in Canada and North America. A little bit about me. I don't do intelligence by nature. My background is in incident response, military. I've done DoD work. How I ended up getting here, over time, working in the cybersecurity field, we obviously saw the need of where intelligence fit within our organization, and ultimately got to the point where we started looking at the correlations and how we could best use intelligence to support our incident response services and shift a little bit more of that risk back in the kill chain.
Mark?
Okay, yeah, so finally, I'm Martin Richmond. I would be your lowest point score if you were guessing the agency due to my accent. I work for Atkins Realis, which is the biggest global construction and engineering services firm that you've never heard of. And we're based in Montreal, and I'm based in Montreal, again, despite my accent. But I spent 20 years doing cyber before it was called cyber, and intelligence in the UK government. I've been a long-time user of Recorded Futures, and this is my third predict, and I did do the RFUN previous to that in a former life. So.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so amazing backgrounds. I'm going to kick us off just to set the stage. We're obviously talking about modernizing defenses in an ever-changing world, but let's start with some of the threats that you're up against every day. Let's just start with some of the very tactical things that you're dealing with in your organizations.
Like I said, we see a ton of activity from nation-state actors. So Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, really trying to get to critical infrastructure. And as was discussed this morning, it's a huge threat. That's complex. It's an adversary that is incredibly capable. So that's a big deal. I think the thing that really bothers us on a regular, everyday basis, though, is third party. And we really feel like that's our soft underbelly. We're going to put in all our defenses, but all of our third-party suppliers, that's a constant challenge. A whole bunch of funny stories on recorded future hits that we've gotten on that are related to third party, but we get stuff like that all the time. And I honestly can't count the number of times that we get an alert from recorded future, and we'll go to the company and say, hey, what about this? And they say, we have no idea what you're talking about. I don't even see that that's happened. And we'll talk to them a bit, and they say, all right, well, you're the first to tell us. We really didn't know. But that is something that we handle every day and changes every single day.
That's great.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind, first of all, is that as much as things change, they don't. And I think, still like, credential compromise, the vulnerabilities on the perimeter, supply chain, cloud, those things are all still, a growing issue for us. I will flag up that, when it comes to credential compromise, we love to talk about AI. It's always like the most, hot topic, I guess. But, it seems like we're finally starting to have a more logical conversation around it. And, where we are seeing it the most and where it is kind of having the biggest kind of impact, I think, is when we're talking about social engineering and how much it's really just lowered the bar for threat actors to, the days of the Nigerian prince reaching out with like some crazy scam, those days are over, and so now, it's much more challenging on the defensive standpoint. And then on the nation state side, really the stealth that we're seeing from some of the nation state actors, in particular, I would flag up China with the obfuscation networks, living off the land techniques, the ability to seemingly just kind of pull out a zero-day vulnerability out of the back pocket really makes it really challenging, I think.
Yeah, I think in my space, a lot of what I see is supply chain, third-party and acquisition risk. We do a lot of acquisitions, so definitely a lot of, mixed environments, the threats there, and then in our space, a lot of fraud and phishing. So a lot of what it comes down to is trying to keep pace with what attackers are doing, like you alluded to. Definitely a lot of increase in fidelity of the tactics that they're using, the ability to readily draft, credential harvesting pages, the ability to draft messaging that end users will receive and respond to. That's a lot of the stuff that we've seen improvements on, in their space over the course of the last year.
So I guess I've got to try and work out what's left. So, for us, we as head of threat intel, which I forgot to say earlier, we have such a wide sort of supplier base and client base, providing services and things from everything from nuclear energy down to pharmaceuticals and consultancy services. It means that our data is never out of date, so it always has our logo on it, or it always is associated to us in some way, shape, or form. And data is now everywhere, so the cloud, has enabled that as has been demanded, and so the data lake or the data ocean that we now exist in, that we've been promised to, is now being circled by sharks that are aching to just steal that juicy data at any possible moment. And so understanding where your data is going to end up, who's got it, and how it's moving around is a real challenge for us.
I'd love to come back to you again, Martin. One of the things we talked about, the five of us 2 weeks ago, was the importance of communication internally. When you have a threat intelligence-led security posture in an organization, we heard from Director Coker some challenges that he's even had with communicating. But talk a little bit about how this works in your current environment, and maybe juxtapose it a little bit with some of the previous engagements.
Of course. So, I'll start my answer to that in that I don't think it's any coincidence that the genesis of the people on this stage is out of a government institution, and that's where the sort of grounding in intelligence analysis and the business that we do and the analysis that we do comes from. And and that's part of it. So doing the intelligence analysis is the first thing, but then communicating that effectively internally to the business. You have to remember, for those of us that have spent all those years being an intelligence professional, 99% of the people you deal with now don't understand the intelligence process, haven't been involved in true intelligence reporting before. So making an assumption that everybody understands the product and everybody understands what you're trying to do and how you do it is a problem. But then refining that and reinterpreting that into a way that's consumable and understandable by people that don't understand that process is fundamental.
Matthew, on the incident response side, do you feel like that has equipped you to handle this better, ultimately knowing how to deal with some of what comes downstream?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the space, it comes down to like breaking barriers, having those communications between both teams, understanding, as we've heard in some other talks earlier, understanding your why, what service you're delivering. At the end of the day, having intelligence, having the ability to, ingest indicators and shift a lot of the risk further left helps, at least from my point of view, because I don't like staying up on weekends. But it definitely makes everybody's job easier whenever everybody coordinates and is moving towards the same goal. And as you alluded to, a lot of it is having that communication of who is doing what and understanding a little bit more about who's doing things in that space and how it's impacting those teams. I think there's a lot to be gained there.
On the ever-changing aspect, modernizing, are there things that you're doing within the organization to just constantly stay ahead? Are you finding that you're having to change your approach in addition to, obviously, Recorded Future and what we do to constantly keep up with things? But how are you, Josh, how are you thinking about that within JPMC?
Well, I think, we mentioned earlier about how, it's part of, people kind of maybe not be as cognizant of the intelligence process that I think some of us kind of take for granted. We like to talk about how the environment is changing constantly. Well, that's what the environment does. So really, inherently, we don't necessarily, it's kind of our standard practice. Not only is the threat environment changing, but the businesses that we all are representing change also. We have to constantly kind of understand what the different intelligence requirements are of that business, what the risks are. We have to constantly understand, what our own gaps might be, how new data might help answer some of those questions, how new activity on the threat actor side might influence those. So it's a never-ending process of being able to kind of self-assess, self-study, and then go through and try to adjust those things. I think you mentioned earlier communication. That's a huge component of it. Like for a threat intel function, you need to be able to communicate to the business. The business needs to be able to communicate to you. You need to understand and help. You need to understand what the business needs, but also help inform the business how to use what you're producing to better protect your organization that you represent.
One of the other things we heard from Director Coker this morning was sometimes tension in the system, or when certain people have access and certain people don't have access. I wanted to touch on that, and I also specifically wanted to call out something that came up in our conversation around the tension between compliance and sometimes what we're doing in threat intelligence. How do you balance and think about that?
Yeah, I think access is a critical piece. I think if you tie that a little bit with some of what we just discussed, I think storytelling is a big part of it. Making sure that everybody is on the same page with what you're trying to do, where you want to go with the information, what the impact is, making sure they really understand why you want something, and then working with compliance to get to yes. If you understand their limitations and why they might not be super willing to give you all the information, and saying, well, we can work with maybe a piece of this. Avangrid piloted a pretty forward-leaning project. We work with another system and our state fusion cell, and we're able to share raw data back and forth. We both happen to use a completely different system, but we use the same system, and we can share some raw data. And compliance was a big deal with that, right? Compliance and legal, and everybody wanted to talk about what we were sharing and why we were doing it. But when we really got together and talked about what the purpose was and made sure everybody knew it was actionable and that this was going to reduce risk and this was good for everyone, then I think we were able to get a lot farther faster on that.
Martin?
Yeah, and as you know, I'm wanted to jump in on the compliance question. Compliance people really don't like me because there's a function of and notwithstanding the valid requirements for working with compliance and performing the functions that need to be done. Trying to remove the tendency for compliance to be a tick box exercise and to be compliant. So, for example, vulnerability management, to be compliant, picking off the top all your vulnerabilities that score CVSS 7.2 and above makes us compliant. I then come into the meeting and say, well, that's lovely, but I've got a CVSS score of 6.9 that touches 30,000 of our endpoints, and 20,000 of those endpoints are in high risk areas. I think we need to prioritize that. And so that upsets the compliance people quite a lot. But it's one of the fundamental steps to trying to pivot your security function to be an intelligence, because that is truly intelligence-led security, in my view.
That's great. One of the things Christopher mentioned this morning was all the investments that have happened in these security capabilities, and yet bad stuff is still getting through. How is the coordination between the security organization and the threat intel organization? Sometimes similar tension to what you see in compliance. How do you see that in your environments, and what are some of the things you do to make that smoother? Obviously, the two have to work tightly together.
Where do you want to start? Okay. For me, one of the most powerful things that we've started doing now to try and get those relationships and those interactions more effective and more functional is assisting other parts of the business, the sort of corporate risk parts of the business, the IT risk parts of the business, assisting them in understanding the threat through a common language. So we're starting to use the MITRE ATT&CK framework to describe the threat. And after having explained to non-threat people what the MITRE ATT&CK framework is, and then getting them to work with their the vendor suppliers to articulate the mitigations and the capabilities that are supplied by those suppliers in the same language, so in terms of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, so we can see what vendor A is attempting to mitigate, and then we can overlay the two, and then you start to form the ability to do your risk assessment because you can see where your holes are and everything else. So it's having those sort of fundamental conversations and talking in a common language with other parts of the business that are not security or IT to try and start that journey moving forward.
Josh, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I think, part of it is, where you can, trying to, have conversations in advance with those customers and getting to understand what really resonates with them, so that you can kind of better present those things. I also think that sometimes, us as intelligence professionals, sometimes we can have a tendency to write a report and say, see ya, went over the wall, did my part. Whereas I think sometimes what we really need to do is have those conversations and that back and forth and, help the customer understand how they can leverage that, what it means, put it into the proper context. Because I think it's really easy for us that are, we're in this day to day, it's all we do, we live it. A lot of other people don't. And so I think we take for granted, understanding that broader context, understanding the risk and the things of that nature. So a lot of times, it does have to be a conversation. When you can set the stage early, when you can have those, build those relationships before you're at a problem, run at a point of a problem, that's obviously ideal. We're not always in that situation. But I do think we have to realize it's a conversation. It's a back and forth. It can't just be a fire and forget.
I was going to say, another part of the puzzle too is, in my space, the intersection of intel and incident responses. You don't know what you don't know, and if you're an organization, you may not have those capabilities. Understanding like threat profiling and who you're really up against is a really big part of the issue, because a lot of companies arbitrarily look at the issue of the day and try to protect against that when depending on your organization, that actor, that entity may never target you. So having the ability to work through that, and again with the communication, vocalize that inside your company and have all those key players on the same page is very critical.
Robert, you mentioned some key wins on the supply chain side. What other key wins have you had and others had that you can talk about on the threat intel side?
Sure. So maybe two of my favorites. Maybe one was last year or something. We got it was a supply chain notification. We got word that a vendor that we thought we might use might have been breached, and so our parent company is Iberdrola. It's based in Spain, and there are other subsidiaries. One of them is in Mexico. So we saw an Iberdrola Mexico file potentially in some of the breach. And we went to them and said, hey, I'm sure you saw this, but there was a breach. Pretty sure that we don't use the vendor, but you might. And like I was talking about before, they went back to the vendor, and the vendor said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then they started to deny it. And so we had this like three-way conversation, and the Mexico group came back to us and said, no, you're wrong. They don't have it. And I said, well, I have the file now. So now I'm 100% certain that that vendor was breached and that one of our files was exposed. And it turns out that the third-party vendor was just denying it, that they knew, and they were just denying it entirely, and they were never going to say anything. But because we had the alerts and we were able to go and get all the information, then eventually they said, okay, well, I guess so, you're right. And there were other people, and their data was exposed also, but nobody would have known that if not for that recorded future alert. So that was pretty great. And then not too long ago, we had a potential issue with a router, and started to look at some of the data, and there was a real concern in one area, and we got sent some of it, and we went back and said, you should be looking at what you're looking at, but this other data that you are not concerned with because it didn't have an obvious flag, we ran it through recorded future, and this is far worse. This part is real bad. You need to finish what you're doing, and then you need to shift to this other piece because this is worse. And we get those types of things. It's sort of become, recorded future in our office has been fun. When we first started to use it, people were sort of glad. They said, okay, that's great intel, people. I'm glad you have a tool and you're able to tell us some things. That's great. And now we've had so many successes. It's sort of taken on this thing of legend. We get these requests. They'll say, can't you run this in recorded future? And I'll say that it doesn't remotely do that. It's not what it is at all, but okay, I appreciate that you're coming to me for that type of request. But it's not. That's a better place to be. I'd rather that than them not knowing what we do.
By the way, I have 2 daughters, and they ask me that all the time. Like, can't you just put that into recorded future? And I actually do half the time. But yeah, other wins. Anybody else want to talk about some key wins?
I could say, in our area, some of what we've seen that we've been able to help with, in our space, we have a lot of things like check fraud. Recorded future helps us get ahead of that. So if for some reason or another something ends up for a large order maybe on a Telegram channel, we're able to get ahead of that before somebody cashes the check and ends up pushing money away. Some other wins in the space, with acquisitions, we have a risk review process. So we've had, potential incidents that could have came into our environment with the migration that we were able to get ahead of through the intelligence of understanding what had happened in the environment that may or may not have been cleaned up, and that allows us to have those conversations and alleviate that risk before we start moving forward with, maybe shuffling things over that we otherwise wouldn't have known about.
Yeah, I mean, we had one where we were able to, based on the data and the alerting that we got out of the platform, we were able to identify somebody that was actively scanning our infrastructure using a sort of freely available tool, and then we were able to identify what they were scanning, approach the part of the business who owned that particular infrastructure, have a conversation with them, find out that they hadn't got MFA on there, find out all these other worrying elements of the infrastructure that could likely have been exploited if the scanning had gone any further, So we were able to at least get half a step in front of that to ensure that, well, you know, we really need to prioritize putting these measures in place because we have, you know, evidence of actual real life activity being done here. So that was it's a really powerful message to be able to present that data and say, look, come on, this is what it says. You can't beat that.
We've been talking about threat intel-led security strategies, and I think emphasizing the word "led" in there as a very proactive capability. Advice that you would give to folks just starting to get into threat intel in their organization, what would you tell them after what you've gone through in many different environments?
My three key pieces are you got to get together an amazing team. My team probably works way too many hours, but having an amazing team. Public-private partnerships, I think, are critical. And then a tool that's going to grow with you and something that you can expand into and you can really use. I think those are critical. I think the most important part, honestly, is start small. Pick one of those pieces, pick one piece of a tool, start to master it, make sure that you understand how to convey that information, make sure you have an audience. I think that's really important.
Great. Josh?
I think my soapbox issue is prioritization. So really being able to understand what intelligence is relevant to your organization and be able to appropriately kind of prioritize that and not just like put it on a Word document that goes in a shared drive that no one looks at again. It should convey to the analysts exactly what's expected, the level of effort to put towards it and things of that nature. And the other key point that I'd flag is being able to operationalize the intelligence. I think we talked about actionability before, but when I think about it, I'm thinking not just characterizing the intelligence itself, but how you're delivering it. If you're the only one that knows that piece of intelligence, you might as well not even have done it. It has to be able to inform a decision, a control or a defensive measure, or something of that nature. If you're a small shop just trying to start out, that's how you demonstrate value, and that's how you kind of can get more resources and demonstrate that you're worth investing in.
Great. Matthew?
Yeah, I'd say really have your mission statement or understand your why. Everybody is on their own journey. I mean, starting day one, being somebody who hasn't really been in the CTI field myself, another really helpful resource I'd say is consult your industry peers. I mean, everybody that I've spoken to so far at Predict and other places has been really helpful and really forthcoming with information. So if you don't have that knowledge or you're looking to maybe continue building on what you have, ask for the expertise of others. Other people have charted that path before, and you don't have to do it alone.
So I'm going to echo the start small message, and certainly don't run before you can walk. The other thing is, and I've got nothing against computer science guys; they're fantastic, but diversity of skill set and diversity of thinking is really, really useful. The last thing you want is a team of people that all think about things and approach problems in exactly the same way. Having different perspectives and different viewpoints on the same problem and different problems is really invaluable to get that sort of intelligence action done.
This is fantastic, and I know we're out of time. We could keep going on, and hopefully many of you get a chance to continue this conversation, but thank you all so much for sharing this and coming out and being great customers and partners. So thank you.